Marie Delphine is one of the darkest figures in early 19th century American history. Historians, local legends, and urban myths have interwoven to create a chilling aura around her name. Marie Delphine McCarty was born on March 19, 1787, in New Orleans, Louisiana, into a wealthy Creole family of Irish heritage. The McCarty clan held a prominent position in society, owned plantations, and engaged in active business ventures in the region. Growing up among the local elite, Delphine was accustomed to lavish balls and aristocratic dinner etiquette. She learned early on that power and wealth made it possible to fulfill one's most capricious desires. At the turn of the 18th and 19th centuries, New Orleans was strongly influenced by French and Spanish cultures, giving the city a unique flair. Intrigue, gossip, and parties were integral to local life, and news traveled swiftly through the narrow streets and grand mansions. Over time, Delphine's name began to surface with increasing frequency in the townspeople's conversations. While still very young, Delphine married a Spanish officer. He died, leaving her a widow, and a wealthy one at that. A few years later, she remarried, this time to a wealthy banker, but that marriage also ended rather quickly. Rumors spread that misfortune followed everyone in Delphine's circle, although no solid evidence was ever produced to confirm any foul play. That never stopped local gossip. Some joked, when Madame LaLaurie approaches the mirror itself cracks from fright. At that time in New Orleans, keeping enslaved people, servants as they were called in Louisiana, remained legal. Many wealthy locals owned slaves for household chores or plantation work. Although cruelty toward enslaved people was generally frowned upon, in practice it largely depended on the individual owner. The methods employed by Madame LaLaurie, however, later became the stuff of the most frightening tales. Marie Delphine rose to real infamy after her third marriage to Leonard Louis Nicolas LaLaurie. The couple moved into a large house at 1140 Royal Street, a location later dubbed the LaLaurie House of Horrors. The mansion stood out with its opulent exterior, ornate wrought iron balconies, and spacious interiors fit for lavish parties. Madame LaLaurie took great pleasure in hosting balls for New Orleans high society. In those grand rooms, French music resonated, and connoisseurs indulged in the finest Creole cuisine. Each gathering dazzled guests with its splendor. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances marveled at the lavish furnishings, the curios, and the portraits on the walls. Some noticed, however, that Delphine kept her servants in a constant state of tension. She might rudely admonish one enslaved person for handing her a plate awkwardly, or scold another in hushed tones for an incorrect look, after which the poor soul would leave the room in tears. Initially, most people dismissed these stories as mere gossip. Madame LaLaurie was too influential to be hounded by the law over jokes, yet the persistent repetition of frightening details eventually sparked the interest of local police. The most notorious incident took place in April 1834, when a fire broke out in the mansion on Royal Street. Half the city rushed to witness the tragedy, and neighbors and volunteers tried to help extinguish the blaze and evacuate the property. While making their way through smoke-filled corridors, rescuers found a locked room where muffled groans could be heard. They forced the door open and were met with a horrific sight. People in blood-stained rags, chained to walls or floors, many bearing signs of severe torture. Rumor had it that the room was essentially a torture chamber. Police were so shaken that their later reports used guarded language. Even so, the city was thrown into turmoil. Local newspapers of the time, such as the New Orleans Bee, published articles describing gruesome details. An enraged crowd stood ready to exact immediate revenge. Furious residents waited outside the mansion, but Madame LaLaurie managed to flee. According to one version, she disguised herself as a commoner, slipped away to the harbor, and left the city. There's even a story that a well-placed acquaintance helped her board a ship for France, or that her husband joined her, or perhaps stayed behind in Louisiana under a different name. Some sources assert that Marie Delphine spent time in Paris, living on income from her former holdings, and not particularly hiding behind an alias. Others believe she moved deeper into the United States, bought a new property, and lived there under a false identity. There are even theories that she came back to New Orleans under a different name, but was never caught. In the early 20th century, during restoration work on one of the McCarty family vaults, workers supposedly discovered a plaque referencing Madame LaLaurie, with a date of death in either 1842 or 1849. Researchers suspect she indeed died in France. Madame LaLaurie went down in history as the embodiment of cruelty toward enslaved individuals, taken to the very extreme. Her legacy of sadistic behavior has inspired writers and filmmakers alike. In various TV series, movies, and books, 19th-century New Orleans is often portrayed as gloomy and mysterious, with the LaLaurie mansion depicted as a haunted house. Subsequent owners of Royal Street have frequently encountered tourists trying to get inside for a glimpse of its dark history. People say you can hear ghostly moans at night in its silent halls. Marie Delphine LaLaurie became a symbol of wanton cruelty, and a reminder that even in societies where slavery was commonplace, there were limits to what people would tolerate. An enraged crowd ransacked her Royal Street mansion and nearly went further, but LaLaurie slipped away from their grasp. Some see her story as a stark example of how people can exploit status and power to commit unspeakable acts. Others examine Marie Delphine as an element of Gothic folklore, where real-life cruelty blends with terrifying legends. In any case, her name evokes ghosts and a bloody Southern past for Americans.